My name is Father George, and for the better part of my 50-odd years, I've walked a path of peace, of understanding, of unwavering love. I serve the Lord and my community, and I've always strived to embody the very essence of forgiveness and compassion. My small parish has been my sanctuary, my home, and the faces of my congregation, my extended family. I've never held animosity in my heart for anyone, believing that even the most misguided souls are deserving of empathy and guidance. I've always believed in turning the other cheek, offering a helping hand, and praying for those who stumble in the darkness. I have always tried to leave a positive impact on every person I have encountered and lived by biblical ways. I am a man of the cloth, and my actions are a reflection of my faith. That is, until Karen Courtley moved in next door. Karen. The name itself now leaves a bitter taste in my mouth, a feeling wholly foreign to me. From the moment her moving truck screeched to a halt on our quiet street, a subtle discord settled in the neighborhood. Her incessant complaints about the color of my garden gnomes, the way I trimmed my hedges, the volume of my morning hymns, they were irritating, yes, but I chalked them up to mere eccentricity. I offered a polite smile, a gentle nod, and continued to live my life as best I knew how, attempting to ignore her petty grievances. I wasn't successful though. Then came the Wi-Fi. It started subtly. My internet speed, usually reliable, began to fluctuate wildly, sputtering and stalling at crucial moments. At first, I blamed my internet service provider, enduring countless frustrating calls and router resets. But then, my nephew, a tech-savvy young man, came to visit. After a few quick scans and a knowing smirk, he delivered the disheartening truth: someone's leeching off your Wi-Fi, Uncle George. And it's not just a little bit, they're practically streaming movies on it. He showed me the list of connected devices, and among them, glaring like a neon sign, was a device named Karen's phone. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I had bent over backward trying to be neighborly, offering her cookies during the holidays, helping her carry groceries, and she was responding by essentially stealing from me. It wasn't about the money, the monthly internet bill was a pittance. It was the principle, the sheer audacity of it all that felt like a betrayal. At that moment something switched inside of me. I felt a frustration like I have never felt before. All I have done is show kindness since I moved into this neighborhood, and this is what I get in return. For weeks, I seethed inwardly, struggling to reconcile my burgeoning anger with my priestly vows. I tried everything to block her. I changed my Wi-Fi password multiple times, using complex combinations of letters, numbers, and symbols that I thought would stump even the most determined hacker. Each time, within days, her device would reappear on my network, a digital parasite sucking the lifeblood out of my connection. I even invested in a fancy new router with advanced security features, but to no avail. Karen, it seemed, was a Wi-Fi ninja, a digital thief with an unsettling knack for bypassing my defenses. The frustration gnawed at me, eating away at my peace of mind. I found myself dwelling on it constantly, unable to focus on my sermons or my pastoral duties. The gentle, forgiving Father George was slowly being consumed by a simmering resentment. I considered confronting her directly, but the thought of engaging in a shouting match with Karen filled me with dread. I knew that if I went down that path, I might say things I would later regret, things that would violate the very principles I held dear. Maybe I should have just talked to her. I confided in Father Thomas, my closest friend and confidant within the diocese. He listened patiently to my tale of digital woe, his brow furrowed in concern. "George," he said finally, "this is clearly affecting you deeply. Have you considered legal action? Perhaps a formal complaint to the police?" I shook my head. The thought of involving the authorities seemed excessive, like using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. Besides, I had no concrete proof, only circumstantial evidence and a nagging suspicion. It would be my word against hers, and I knew that Karen would deny everything with a straight face. Perhaps, Father Thomas suggested, you need to find a way to detach yourself from the situation. Focus on your faith, your community, your calling. Don't let Karen's actions consume you. His words were wise, but they offered little comfort. I was trapped in a vicious cycle of anger and helplessness, unable to break free from Karen's insidious grip. The only thing I was thinking about was her leeching off my internet. I knew it was wrong to have these sinful thoughts, but she was pushing me to the limit. I needed to do something. Sleep became a luxury. I tossed and turned each night, haunted by visions of Karen gleefully streaming movies on my dime, while I struggled to load a simple web page. The more I obsessed over the Wi-Fi theft, the more my resentment festered, growing into something darker, something uglier. I started avoiding her, crossing the street whenever I saw her approaching, refusing to make eye contact. I even considered moving, abandoning my beloved parish and seeking solace in a new community, far away from Karen's toxic presence. But the thought of surrendering, of allowing her to drive me away from my home, was even more unbearable. One sweltering afternoon, as I was preparing my sermon for Sunday Mass, my computer froze completely. I cursed under my breath, slamming my fist on the desk in frustration. It was the final straw. Something inside me snapped. The gentle, forgiving Father George was gone, replaced by a man driven by righteous anger, a man teetering on the edge of despair. I stood up from my desk, my hands trembling, and I made a decision. It was a rash decision, a reckless decision, a decision that I knew, deep down, was wrong. But I couldn't stop myself. I remembered seeing the electrical box on the side of her house. The thought sparked and I was consumed with rage. I marched out of my house, my face flushed with anger, and headed straight for Karen's property. I glanced around nervously, making sure that no one was watching. The street was deserted, the only sound the chirping of crickets and the distant hum of traffic. I reached the electrical box, my heart pounding in my chest. I pulled out my trusty pair of wire cutters, a tool I usually used for pruning my rose bushes. With a deep breath, I snipped the main power line, plunging Karen's house into darkness. A wave of guilt washed over me immediately. What had I done? I, a man of God, had deliberately sabotaged my neighbor's property. I had violated my own moral code, succumbed to the very anger that I preached against. The power in Karen's house was out and I was consumed with guilt. I knew that my actions were wrong and as a priest I should have known better. As I turned to leave, I heard a noise behind me. I whirled around and saw Karen standing there, her face contorted with rage, a baseball bat clutched tightly in her hands. Her eyes were filled with so much hate. "You," she shrieked, her voice trembling with fury. "I knew it. I knew you were behind this." I froze, paralyzed with fear. I had been caught red-handed. I tried to explain myself, to apologize for my actions, but the words wouldn't come. My guilt was overwhelming. Karen raised the baseball bat above her head, her knuckles white with tension. I braced myself for the impact, closing my eyes and offering a silent prayer. But the blow never came. Instead, I heard a loud yell, followed by a sickening thud. I opened my eyes and saw Father Thomas standing behind Karen, a look of shock and horror on his face. He had tackled her from behind, wresting the baseball bat from her grasp. He had witnessed the whole event and came to intervene. "George, are you all right?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. I nodded weakly, still reeling from the shock of the situation. Karen, however, was far from subdued. She continued to scream and curse, struggling against Father Thomas's grip. "Get off me, you old fool," she yelled. "I'm going to call the police. You're both going to jail." And that's exactly what happened. Within minutes, the police arrived, sirens blaring, lights flashing. They took statements from all three of us, carefully documenting the scene. Karen, still ranting and raving, was immediately placed under arrest for assault. I explained my actions, admitting to cutting off her electricity. Father Thomas confirmed my story, explaining how he had witnessed the confrontation and intervened to prevent Karen from harming me. To my surprise, the police also arrested me for vandalism and damaging private property. I was shocked, but I understood why. I had committed a crime, albeit a crime of passion, and I had to face the consequences. Even Father Thomas was taken into custody for a short time, but he was quickly released after explaining that he had only acted in self-defense. The next few days were a blur of legal proceedings, media scrutiny, and public humiliation. My mugshot was plastered across the local news channels, and the story of the Wi-Fi war priest became a national sensation. My parish was in an uproar, divided between those who supported me and those who condemned my actions. Some saw me as a victim of Karen's harassment, a man driven to the breaking point by her relentless provocations. Others saw me as a hypocrite, a man who had betrayed his vows and brought shame upon the church. I felt utterly alone, abandoned by my community and consumed by guilt and regret. I had let my anger get the best of me, and I had paid a heavy price for it. I sat in my house with the power on in silence because I knew I had to live with the consequences of my actions. I felt like the Lord was testing me, but I did not know what the outcome would be. I spent countless hours in prayer, seeking forgiveness and guidance. I confessed my sins to Father Thomas, who listened with compassion and offered words of comfort. "George," he said, "you made a mistake, a serious mistake. But you are not a bad person. You are a good man who was pushed to the edge. The Lord forgives those who are truly repentant." His words brought me some solace, but the shame still lingered. I knew that I had to make amends for my actions, not just to the court of law, but to my community and to myself. I was also in contact with the church elders so that I would be able to repent for my actions. This felt like rock bottom for me as a priest. The court proceedings were swift and decisive. Karen, facing charges of assault with a deadly weapon, was denied bail and remanded to custody. Her history of petty crimes and disruptive behavior weighed heavily against her. I, on the other hand, was granted bail and ordered to undergo anger management counseling. I was also required to pay restitution for the damage I had caused to Karen's property. I was relieved that I had avoided jail time, but I knew that my punishment was far from over. My reputation was tarnished, my credibility shattered. It would take years, perhaps even a lifetime, to rebuild the trust that I had lost. But I was determined to try. I started by issuing a public apology, expressing my sincere remorse for my actions and vowing to dedicate myself to serving my community with renewed humility and compassion. I began volunteering at a local soup kitchen, offering my time and my energy to those in need. I rejoined my parish, attending every Mass and participating in every community event. Slowly, gradually, the tide began to turn. People started to see that I was truly sorry for what I had done, that I was genuinely committed to making amends. They saw that I was still the same Father George, the same kind and compassionate man they had always known, albeit a man who had made a terrible mistake. Karen, meanwhile, was eventually convicted of assault and sentenced to a year in jail. Her reign of terror on the neighborhood was finally over and she was no longer my problem anymore. While I did not want her to get hurt, I am glad that she finally faced consequences for her actions. I learned a valuable lesson about the dangers of anger and the importance of forgiveness. I also learned that even the most devout among us are capable of making mistakes. But it is how we respond to those mistakes that truly defines us. And I was determined to define myself as a man who had learned from his errors, a man who had emerged from the darkness stronger and more compassionate than before.